Okay, so um, this this edition of the South Florida Arboriculture and Landscape Professionals webinar is we're going to have Dr. Smyth. She's down in Tropical Research Education Center, and I know that a lot of you like kind of have some work with fertilizers and particularly like with GIBMP and that type of thing. And so she's going to go from the landscape to the actual water bodies and giving us that perspective. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Dr. Smyth here.
Great. Thank you all for having me today. I'm Ashley Smyth. I'm an associate professor. Whew, that's a new thing, so I'm still not used to saying it. In the Soil, Water, and Ecosystem Sciences Department located at the Tropical Research and Education Center in Homestead. And I'm really excited to talk to you all today about the work that we're doing in our lab that focuses on nutrients in our coastal and aquatic ecosystems. At our lab, we are the Coastal Biogeochemistry Lab. I know biogeochemistry can kind of sound like a complicated science, but because it really is, all these sciences wrapped into one. And that's what I love about what we get to do. For me, we study the biology, so the plants, the animals, the people that affect the chemistry, like nutrients, and then the geology, so all of that that's happening in the sediments and the soils. So our lab is a nutrient biogeochemistry lab, and that means that we study nutrients like nitrogen and carbon and phosphorus and how they cycle between sediments, water, and air. And we do this because we are trying to understand how ecosystems work and how these ecosystems are then impacted by human activities. Biogeochemistry happens everywhere, but we study it in the coastal systems. With the second longest coastline in the United States, these areas are really important for Florida and even globally because they provide benefits to humans in a variety of different forms, and they're also really threatened by human and natural activities. Lots of people are moving to the coasts. So knowledge of coastal biogeochemistry is then used to inform policy and management decisions in this changing climate, especially when we're having things like sea level rise, increasing water temperatures, and urban development in our coastal zones. So the processes that we study in our lab are related to water quality, fisheries, resilience of coastal communities. And in short, the science that we're doing is able to connect with management and restoration to help keep Florida around long term. My goal is to have the Florida that I love be the same Florida that future generations can have and enjoy and love too. At the core of what we do in our lab is water quality. So when I think of water quality, there's a couple of images that come to my mind. And I think these two figures kind of capture that really well. The first on the left is a fish kill. Like, I don't want to go to the beach and have my lounge chair set out with a bunch of dead fish right there next to me. Like, no one wants to do that. And then so that's like my way of thinking about like what bad water quality looks like. Like that would be a bad water quality. On the right side, you see this nice pristine beach where people are swimming, you're able to be out in the water, and that would be good water quality. So good water quality is making sure that the water is safe to swim in, to drink in, or to be used. And good water quality is then free from pollutants. Water quality is defined by the EPA as water that's suitable for whatever the use is. And the water quality criteria would then change based on what that use is. So for example, recreation would have different water quality standards than say agriculture or aquaculture. And those criteria are then set based specifically on what you want to do with that water. And the criteria are then used to set whether the water quality is good or the water quality is bad. But it really comes down to ensuring that the water is protected from pollutants. So what is water pollution then? Water pollution is really three different areas. It's nutrients, it's toxins, it's sediments, it's things that are in the water that shouldn't be there. It's that contamination of the water bodies. And water pollution can take a variety of different forms. There's the biological components that contribute to water pollution. That's like bacteria and viruses. We often have shellfish or beach closures in Florida that are due to fecal coliforms. So that would be your biological pollution. We have chemical pollutions like nitrogen, pesticides, drugs, even physical pollution like sediments, because these sediments and other organic material, sometimes grass clippings, I could even consider a source of pollution, are just ultimately going to affect how that water body looks and how that water body functions. Now, regulating nutrient pollution is a little bit of a challenge because there are two different ways that pollution enters coastal systems. The first is through point sources, and these are the ones that are really easy to regulate. That's the one where you can go, oh, look, there's a pipe. I can point to that. I see the pollution. Then we have these non-point sources, and those are like the runoff that's integrating across the landscape. And there's not just that one individual thing you can point to. It really is a collection of a variety of different sources with this indirect input into the coastal or aquatic zones. So all of this fits under the Clean Water Act. And the Clean Water Act was really set to establish a national commitment to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of our nation's water. The Clean Water Act has been instrumental in improving the health of rivers, estuaries, coasts, lakes around the United States. It's stopped billions of pounds of pollution from fouling our waters and has actually increased the number of waterways that are now safe to swim in or safe to fish in. The Clean Water Act was really came from the Cuyahoga River in Ohio. The Cuyahoga River was declared the most polluted river in the United States, and it actually caught on fire 13 different times. The largest fire occurred in the 1950s and contributed to more than $1 million in damages of boats and riverfront office buildings. Now, $1 million of damage in the 1950s is a little bit different than $1 million of damage right now. So just think of how much damage that had during that time. At the Times magazine described the Cuyahoga River at this time as a river that oozes rather than flows, and which a person does not drown in but decays in. This is bad water quality. This is a sign that there is water pollution in this area. And the water was now a public health concern. And so that really led the nation to help to shift emphasis and create the Clean Water Act. The Cuyahoga River fires are really just shifted the public opinion and led to this motivation for action to have and protect our waters. So now that we know what water quality is, we need to figure out how we measure water quality. And there's a lot of things that we do in our lab to actually go out and look and assess the quality of the water. And what we say for what is good quality, again, determines whether or not what the usage of that water is for. We do a lot of monitoring, and there's many ways to monitor water conditions. This usually constitutes taking samples from the water or the sediments and then measuring things like dissolved oxygen, suspended sediments, nutrients, metals, oils, pesticides, etc. So our lab is out there on those boats taking our samples. We also are out there making observations. And many individuals are doing the same thing. I get a lot of calls and emails about people reporting that their water has turned guacamole colored green, or that they are observing fish kills. And so we have those biological and chemical monitoring, but we also are monitoring just the general physical conditions of the water. So this is things like the flow, the temperature, the color, even if like erosion on the stream banks. And all those are important contributors for when we're thinking about what is water quality. A lot of what we do relates to maintaining that water quality and conducting that monitoring. So for us, the monitoring is usually occurring monthly, and we do this in order to characterize the waters and make sure we can then identify when changes happen. So we have to do this over time. And that's the only way we can really figure out then if there are any water quality problems that do emerge. We also monitoring also gives us information on gives us the chance to get data that can help us design specific pollution reduction programs. Uh, and then also whether or not those reduction programs that are already in effect are actually meeting their goals and working to control water pollution. And the monitoring is also really helpful at responding to emergencies. Many of you might remember Piney Point over in Tampa, where a bunch of phosphorus was linked into Tampa Bay, and we were able to respond to that quickly and understand the impacts of it because we had monitoring data from the area. The key here is that we go out, our lab is out there taking our samples, and then we're able to use that then to help make these decisions, and one of which is including regulating that point source discharge. And understanding where that pipe is and how much is loading is really key to maintaining these goals. So these indicators that we use in our lab are then mostly related to temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, our nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, turbidity, or the amount of particles that are in the water, and then other of these bioindicators that we'll sample for sometimes too. But this is all, collecting all this data is really helping us to then make these decisions about our water quality and what we should be doing in these waters. Is it safe to do all the things that we want to use water for? The indicators also then help us to identify the overall health of the ecosystem. So for example, we're looking at temperature as our impact on water quality, and temperature, if we're seeing these changes in temperature, that can actually, temperature loading is a thing. And that can be related to the warming of water on land. And now that temperature is entering these coastal zones. This is important because warmer water holds less oxygen. And we want to make sure that there is enough oxygen in our waters for our fish and other aquatic life to survive. Sediments we monitor because sediments are that erosion from land. And they can carry a lot of they can carry pesticides and heavy metals, but they also then affect the ability for filter feeders or other aquatic life to live. And they can also affect the amount of light that's getting to the sediments, where we have things like seagrass. Chemicals, we got like gasoline, cleaning products, all of that, that all enters, and obviously like that just has a direct threat to human and aquatic health. Litter, we don't want to see litter in our waterways because wildlife can get entangled in that. And then that, like many years ago, sea turtles being or caught in the six-packs, the plastic rings on six-packs was like a huge problem, and it still is. That's why we cut our rings now. But that's another impact on water quality. And then, of course, nutrients, which is what we think about most in our lab. And nutrients are linked to blue baby syndrome. So that's really where nutrients start getting a lot of regulation. We don't want to have too much nitrate in our waters. And then we also see those too many nutrients causing those algal blooms, or that turning of that water, that guacamole colored green. So nutrient pollution is then what we really focus on in our lab. And nutrient pollution can come from a variety of different sources. Nutrient pollution is really just the idea that there are too many nutrients entering our waterways. And these nutrients are mainly nitrogen and phosphorus. And what happens is when they enter, then the algae start to go to town, and we get this excessive and overgrowth of algae, changing the water quality, and then ultimately being the source of the nutrients were ultimately the source of pollution that led to the algal bloom, which can have economic and human health implications too. Because there's increasingly more people living and moving to the coastal zones, there are more and more nutrients entering our coastal waters from things like wastewater treatment facilities, and as well as just from that runoff from land, and even all those urban areas that are draining into our coastal areas. And then fertilizer use on land and through farming, and to make sure that we have smooth, green, lush front lawns are also part of what sources of these nutrients to these areas. So nutrient pollution is really linked to this demand for food and to support the growing population. This figure shows how our fertilizer use, which is in red, is expected to increase as our population increases too. And so understanding what happens to nutrients is really key when we key for maintaining our water quality. The discovery of fertilizer via the Haber-Bosch process is really what came to this problem that we have with nitrogen pollution. It really changed the amount of nitrogen that was made available to humans on Earth. Uh, Typically, the majority of nitrogen is tied up in N2 gas, and that N2 gas is unusable by a lot of aquatic life. And so the nitrogen in cycling in our systems was kind of imbalanced with what the system could handle and process, because they would only fix that nitrogen when they actually needed it. But actually what happened with the Haber-Bosch process is that now we have more and more nitrogen cycling in our systems. The Haber-Bosch process uses high temperatures to convert ammonium, which is a bioavailable or usable form of nitrogen, to make ammonium from that N2 gas. So typically this N2 fixation only occurred by these microorganisms or with lightning, and now humans are actually able to intervene and physically do this, which is just more than double the amount of nitrogen that's cycling in our systems. In fact, it's almost 100 times just based on 1860 to 2000 data. And this, I think, just demonstrates how human activities are really shifting the balance of nutrients in our waterways. If we think back in time, I would argue that fertilizer is probably, in the Haber-Bosch process, is probably one of the greatest inventions, because it's really leading us to function and work the way that we do today. In fact, the Haber-Bosch process was related to this population explosion because we're able to actually support this growing population and giving them food. But we can also have too much of a good thing. And this is when nutrients is one of those exactly. The nitrogen, like I said, the nitrogen cycle was once in balance, but we've shifted that system. So I think and now we're seeing water quality declines. So I think of nutrients for our coastal areas and all of our aquatic waterways as, like, I think of coffee for myself. I need a little coffee to kickstart my day, but if I have too much coffee, I'm going to talk like this for an hour, no one's understanding what I'm saying, and then my system's going to crash, and I'm going to need that time to recover. And that's exactly how nutrients are for our coastal and aquatic waterways. On the left side of this figure, you see good water quality, right? There's a nice balance of nutrients. People are swimming, people are fishing, there's aquatic vegetation growing. But then on the other side, when we have all those excess nutrients, we start to see that deterioration of water quality. And the increase in nutrients or nutrient pollution is a term called eutrophication, which is a noun, and it means an increase in the rate of supply of organic matter to a system. The increase in the rate of supply is that the excess nutrients, so nitrogen, phosphorus, leading to this growth of algae or the organic matter. And then that ecosystem is that water body, so that coastal area or that estuary. So eutrophication is really related to nutrient pollution, leading to algal growth, leading in our coastal systems. Excess nutrients is what I think of the most, right? So we see that increase in that bloom. When that bloom happens, that algae is then, as it dies and decomposes, but that process sucks out oxygen and creates these fish kills or these low oxygen zones. And fish get trapped in there and then they end up suffocating. So it's our excess nutrients that lead to the bloom that then relate to the hypoxia. This happens all around Florida. Here's just an image from the St. Lucie River where you start to see these symptoms of eutrophication and the waterways becoming eutrophic. And then here's a photo from the Miami Herald of a fish kill in Cocoa Beach, Florida. So we are really seeing this. Nutrients are really affecting our coastal and aquatic systems here in Florida. But they also affect around the world. Here's a figure, it's pretty old now, so I'm sure by today there are going to be a few more dots on this, but this is not just a Florida problem. It really is a global problem. And it's not just a coastal problem, it is a freshwater problem too. Too many nutrients are leading to dead zones and just impacting all of our waters. The idea of nutrients being a pollutant really started in the 1960s from freshwater lakes. These are these experimental lakes in Canada. They still exist. And they were able to put up a curtain. And on the left side of the lake, on the figure to the right, you see there were no nutrients added. On the right side, you see this green color, and that was because they dumped a ton of nutrients in this lake. And the nutrient that they dumped in was phosphorus. So this was our first glimpse of how too much phosphorus entering our freshwater systems is then leading to this change in water quality by contributing to algal growth. To not be undone by the limnologists, the coastal ecologists decided that they also wanted to test this out. So coastal work was conducted at the University of Rhode Island in big mesocosms. They actually brought in a bunch of water from the brackish area, from these estuaries, and did the same thing. They wanted to see how estuaries and coasts were responding to nutrients and wanted to see if it was happening in the same way that lakes were with phosphorus. This is just some of their results. So chlorophyll A is the concentration of the algae cells. And then on the x-axis here, you have the C's, which are the control group, so they didn't add any nutrients to. The N, they just added nitrogen. The P, they just added phosphorus. And the N plus P is adding both nitrogen and phosphorus. And what you see here is that the bars when nitrogen is there, those N's, are a lot higher than the bars when they're just P alone or even the control. And so these results really pointed to some fundamental differences. They really demonstrated that nitrogen was the limiting nutrient and the nutrient that's of concern for our coastal and marine systems, and that phosphorus was really the key for our freshwater systems. And this is because that there's more nitrogen fixation typically in freshwater systems, because that's that conversion of N2 gas into usable forms of nitrogen. And that's because the bacteria and microbes that perform fixation are kind of sensitive to salt, so they're more likely to happen in freshwater systems. And then there's also this change where in freshwater systems, you have phosphorus that's then released or bound to the sediments. And when that gets salt, you actually can release that phosphorus into the water column, which creates this demand for nitrogen instead. So that was sort of the big dogma where nitrogen is limiting in saltier systems and freshwater systems are more affected by phosphorus. But it really does depend. It's not so black or white, and often it depends on the season, where phosphorus limitation might be more during the spring, and then you get nitrogen limitation more during the summer. And we are starting to sort of see that it's not so black and white, but it's a good place to start and a good way to think about what nutrients really matter for those systems. But the need for specific system data is there still. I think that this figure just shows like how nitrogen loading is really affecting our coastal zones. This phytoplankton production, again, the algae growth. And this is a review that they did from over 51 different estuaries. And nitrogen load was really what was explaining all 36% of the variability that they were seeing in algal growth. So again, showing that this nitrogen is really one of the key contributors to our water quality problems and that it is really a pollutant here. This doesn't matter just around the world. It does really matter here in Florida. In Florida, our coastal systems are 75% of our water bodies are actually impaired for nutrient pollution. 363 are impaired just for nitrogen, and 354 are impaired for phosphorus. So this map is showing all the different impairments around the state, and nutrients are a key pollutant here for our waters. And this is really important because, especially for me where I work, because the nutrients are leading to this loss of seagrasses. And seagrasses are they're valuable for us because they provide a bunch of ecosystem services. They are habitat for commercially available fish. They store carbon, they remove nitrogen, and they're really pretty to look at and swim around. So increasing nutrients has actually led to this increased growth of phytoplankton, which has then led to a decrease in light availability, which ultimately has led to a shift in our ecosystems where we're now seeing loss of seagrasses and loss of primary producers on the sediments. And all that is happening in the water column now. And phytoplankton are much, and macroalgae are much better competitors for nutrients when they're available. So our nutrient pollution from land that's entering our coastal zones is now really shifting what these coastal areas look like and how they function. There are steps to mitigate eutrophication. Most management strategies have focused on reducing nitrogen loads from the watershed. And that's the best idea. Keep nutrients on land where we need nutrients. So we have wastewater treatment facilities, and many are being upgraded to be better about removing nutrients before they discharge. And then we also have these other engineering solutions like stormwater ponds throughout the landscape where they now can hold water, can process water, and might help to remove some of those nutrients before it then moves out into the coastal zones. But these are not 100% efficient. And another solution that's we talk about a lot in our lab is then restoring areas that have been lost that have high rates of denitrification. These habitats are areas like seagrass beds, salt marshes, oyster reefs, and we've lost them all globally and here in Florida too because of pollution, overfishing, and human development. And denitrification is a really important service that we've lost when we lose these areas. Denitrification is nature's way to remove nitrogen. It takes that bioavailable nitrogen, here is nitrate, and converts it, microbes convert it through a series of steps into N2 gas. And that N2 gas is where we want nitrogen. That's back in the atmosphere. That's that unusable form of nitrogen. And so there's growing interest in restoring areas that have been lost that have these high rates of denitrification. And this is where the core of the research that our lab does focuses on. One of the key questions that our lab is addressing is whether or not bivalves are the solution to our nitrogen pollution problems in coastal areas. Bivalves are filter feeding bivalves in particular, like oysters and mussels, clams, and we are really trying to look at what their role is in water quality. And so there's a lot of interest in restoring bivalves and using bivalve aquaculture as an in-water best management practice to remove nitrogen. Up in Long Island Sound, we have the Billion Oyster Project. Over in Chesapeake Bay, we have the 10 billion for the Bay because, of course, Chesapeake Bay cannot be one-upped by anybody else. And then more locally in Florida, we have a project called A Billion Clams for Charlotte Harbor. So these projects are all around this idea of adding shellfish back into the ecosystem in order to help remove nitrogen and clean the water. Because shellfish are able to filter feed. So that algae that the nutrients have led to their growth of are then grazed on by oysters, clams, mussels, those guys. And then they're repackaged into their biodeposits. These biodeposits are juicy organic matter that sediment microbes love, and that can then promote denitrification. So that is one aspect of nitrogen removal that shellfish can provide, is that promoting of the denitrification. But they also remove nitrogen by harvest. So that's where the aquaculture angle comes into play, where those oysters or clams are out there filtering water, doing all these great things. And then some of the nitrogen that they take out as they're filtering goes into their biomass. So it goes into their shells and their tissues as they grow. And then when they're physically harvested and extracted from the waterway, that's a net like nitrogen removal. So harvest is a really clear and well-defined nitrogen removal mechanism that shellfish provide. The promotion of denitrification is a little less clear. It's a little harder. It's a little bit more muddy. It's harder to measure and requires specialized equipment. And what we're really starting to see is that not all shellfish are as efficient at promoting denitrification, but that we do and that the location matters. So it's not always that it's not all one size fits all, and that just dumping a ton of shellfish into your waters would actually remove a ton of nitrogen. And that's where our lab is really focused on, is trying to do these balances. This past summer, we went out in Tampa Bay to look at these nitrogen removal services associated with shellfish aquaculture. Here are just some of the photos from my lab group where we're in the field collecting our samples. We spend a lot of time out on the water, what was me, but we're collecting water samples, working with our industry partners, collecting sediment samples from within and around oyster reefs, and even on the underneath bags at shellfish farms. And we're really trying to understand how then these shellfish, whether through restoration or through aquaculture, are providing this nitrogen removal service. By collecting samples from that are affected by clams and oysters, as well as background sediment, so what's just naturally happening in Tampa, for example, we're able to really see how shellfish can enhance what nature can do alone. So here's just some of our preliminary results. You don't have to look at all the numbers, but I do want to give some context to the relative importance of shellfish. So we were able to measure the extractive services. So that's that based on the assimilation at harvest from oysters and clams. And then we also measured that denitrification from the sediments around our oysters and clams. And so we then scaled our numbers based on the numbers of clams and oysters that were out there. And we were able to find that there's a lot of potential for shellfish to remove nitrogen. However, there were clear differences. Our oysters were not nearly as good at removing nitrogen as our clams were. And some of this could be just because of the spatial footprint that we're operating at in Tampa Bay. There's a lot more clam aquaculture and clam restoration than there is for oysters. But this just highlights to me that there's a potential for scaling, yet not all shellfish are created equally, and each one you might need to use a different one in a different location. What I also want to draw your attention to is the total nitrogen targets for this region. So that is 570 kilograms of nitrogen per year is the nitrogen removal from the total maximum daily loads that we're trying to target and to help restore the water quality. And so our shellfish are just a drop in the hat for that. The clams, who are removing much more than the oysters, are only removing about 5,000 kilograms per year. So I think these data do demonstrate the potential for oysters to be a tool, and oysters and clams to be a tool in our toolbox. And there is opportunities to then scale that up to the watershed to help meet our targets. But really, they're just that. They're just a tool. They're not going to be the one size fits all approach. And the best way to remove nitrogen from our coastal waters is to keep it on land, to not let it enter. Because, I mean, our shellfish are helping out a little bit, but they're not going to solve all the problems here. So that leads me to this question, then what can we do to reduce our nitrogen footprint? And the footprint is pretty big. So where can we have our own roles? The first thing to do is to reduce our fossil fuel use. Fossil fuel actually releases nitrate, and then that can come down through rain and other places. So it's one of the key pieces of nutrient pollution. And that's something that we can do. We can also eat less meat. Meat production in and of itself does produce nitrogen, and part of that is through fertilizer, and part of that is through the amount that's just needed to produce meat. And so a study looked at how much of the nitrogen that is actually used on crops and to support meat consumption, and found that only about 12% of that nitrogen actually enters our mouth. And so more of that nitrogen is actually being run off, or where does it go? It goes to something else. And so it could enter our coastal systems. From that same paper, they found that a human requires about 2 kilograms of nitrogen per year, but we actually create about 20 kilograms of nitrogen per person per year. Far far exceeding our own nutritional needs, again, leading to the excess nitrogen that's cycling in our systems. The other thing that we can do is to aquaculture shellfish. Like I said, having those shellfish in our systems is a great polisher off. They're part of this. They can help remove those nutrients. And they also provide tasty treats for us. I love eating shellfish, and you should, if you see aquaculture shellfish and are able to eat aquaculture shellfish or shellfish period, try to order them. Eating aquaculture shellfish is a win-win-win. It's providing this win for our industry partners who are now growing these shellfish. It's providing that win for us because we get to eat them, and it is providing these water quality benefits. I think it's important to note that it's aquacultured shellfish that might have more benefits than just restoring shellfish or wild harvested reefs, for example. That's because aquacultured shellfish are able to have that extractive capacity, and restoring reefs will improve denitrification, and it does store some of the nitrogen while the reefs are out there or the shellfish are out there growing. But the aquacultured ones are now really this net removal of nitrogen, because if you're going to buy aquacultured shellfish but that's grown in Tampa but you live in Jacksonville, that's like a total nitrogen removal from the whole watershed. So if you see aquaculture shellfish on the menu, I suggest you get some. And Florida shellfish are really tasty. The other key thing that we can do to protect our water quality is to manage nitrogen loads. This is some data from Chesapeake Bay, and you see that there has actually been a decrease in nitrogen loading by about 24% between the mid-1980s, and this was in the early 2000s or 2010s. And you see that there is this actual increase in nitrogen loading. And this is because Chesapeake Bay and the Chesapeake Bay region have really put an emphasis on reducing nutrient loading and keeping nutrients on land through fertilizer recommendations and through more adaptive management. At the same time, what they're seeing in Chesapeake Bay is that while we have this decrease in nitrogen, we're now seeing this increase in seagrasses. And so the seagrass increase is also through active restoration, but we have to have these go hand in hand. There has to be that ability to reduce nutrients on land, to reduce nutrients from land entering our waters, and then being really active and adaptive in our coastal systems by then helping the system out to restore those habitats. And the added bonus with these activities is that adding the seagrass back in also means that we are now getting that denitrification service that our seagrass areas have. Managing nitrogen loads is really key, and we've actually done a pretty good job of it here in Florida. In fact, Tampa Bay is considered one of the big success stories for nutrient management. The recognition that there was this increase in nutrient pollution leading to chlorophyll and that loss of algal blooms and that loss of seagrass then led to some adaptive and active management, including managing wastewater loads, and non-point sources were even able to be managed, that then led to this improvement in water quality, and then this ultimately increasing our seagrass areas. Again, this is through active management. It's not just we stop doing this. It's through intentionally and being thoughtful about managing nutrients on land, and then also spending that time to restore these habitats in coastal areas. Collectively, we're able to help work to recover our coastal and aquatic ecosystems. And so I want to come back to the Cuyahoga River today. This is what it looks like now. I think this is a true comeback story of how watershed actions and water quality regulations and people all work together to protect water quality. Because ultimately, we're all living downstream, and managing nutrients on land is really the first key to protecting our coastal zones. So thank you for your time and attention, and I will be happy to take any questions.
All right, folks, if you've got any questions, you can either put them into the chat, or you can just go ahead and unmute yourselves and ask directly.
Thanks, Tia.
So, I know you kind of talked about like marsh areas and like how a lot of them, and I know that like your focuses for research is a lot of it's been on the shellfish and but I was kind of wondering um how much of these, there's parts of Florida that are kind of marshy, and there's certain coastal areas along the United States that are that way. Is is there any, I mean, but Florida is like really known, I guess, for being like a really beachy state, and like I kind of wonder, I mean, I guess except outside of the Big Bend and then like the Everglades area, are there any other areas like that that could be significant contributors to denitrification in the state, or are
From
those kind of the big ones?
marshes?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's like freshwater marshes are huge in Florida, like a lot of like the Everglades, like you said. The Big Bend has a lot of seagrasses. There's some marshes there. There's good marshes. I guess this is what I love Florida is there's these pockets of really high quality habitat scattered throughout the state. We've actually done a lot of our work in marshes up in the Jacksonville area at the Guantanamo-Matanzas National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is just north of St. Augustine. They have some of the they have really nice marshes and they have really nice oysters too. But yeah, that does exist around the state, and there's potential there for restoration. In fact, what I think is fun is that we have freshwater wetlands too, and a lot of our BMPs are around restoring wetlands, and so you can actually have wetland restoration ahead of the tide, ahead of the saltwater, and that can help to buffer those nutrients from entering our coastal areas. So wetland restoration is a great uh, is great to be thinking about too.
So related question here that popped up from Lori Vault. Do mangroves help with denitrification?
Excellent question, Lori. I actually have a PhD student who just was investigating this because they're not as well known as these other habitats are. And yes, mangroves do help with denitrification too. I'll make sure to add those data back into this talk next time. I think that that's a great idea.
I
Hey,
get.
Ashley,
Oh, go ahead, please.
you're talking about nutrients that are coming from land and going towards the salt water. What's the inverse of that? What goes from the salt water towards the land? I'm thinking about saltwater infiltration into land and all that. I know it's not directly in your line of study, but I wonder if you ran into it incidentally and could talk about that. I'm a board certified master arborist, and so it's neat for me to listen to a talk like this and kind of figure out what's going on at that interface between the land and the saltwater bodies.
Yeah. Saltwater intrusion. Yes, it's definitely a key. Well, we actually have a new project that we're starting that's really looking at groundwater saltwater intrusion because I mean, I live in Homestead, so it's something that we live uh, very close to and are really affected by. So yeah, so we are having salinization happening to a lot of our coastal waters or fresh waters, and so that's that increase in salt. And so as seas are rising, we're changing. Like sometimes we don't let as much uh, freshwater inputs anymore because of all like how we're managing water on land and water quantity matters. So we're seeing this like increase in salt within our systems. So the upper limit sometimes of where we're getting the salt is actually shifting. And so areas that didn't used to see so much salt are now seeing salt. So we have this one site, for example, where it's generally salinity stays at about 1 PSU. And one time when we were out there sampling, it went up to like 5. I know this doesn't sound like a lot, but that's like a big deal when you're an area that isn't used to seeing that salt stress. So saltwater intrusion is a big issue. And saltwater does bring other things too. It's not just bringing in salt. In some instances, saltwater can actually be a source of nutrients and can bring those nutrients into our more brackish or freshwater systems as well. And that salt water can also shift and actually cause that release of phosphorus from sediments. So unintended consequence, but an effect on nutrient availability too. I hope I answered your question, Jonathan.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, going back up, I think there was kind of a comment earlier about microplastics. I mean, I think that's something that is coming up more and more in terms of water quality and like this interaction between like what's going on in the land and water.
Yeah.
Is there been a lot of is there or what where are we in terms of like investigating all that locally and is there anything out there?
Yeah, so there's the Florida Microplastic Awareness Project, and that is a community science water quality monitoring for microplastics that's run by UFIFIS. Maya McGuire was running it. I think Anna Braswell is now running it. But yeah, they're everywhere. The challenge with microplastics and PFAS, like these forever chemicals, is that like how do you get them out? Like they are really everywhere. And I think there's more of an emphasis in the science world to be focused on like what do they do now that they're here. So thinking not just like I found microplastics, but what are the consequences of that? Like, do microplastics affect the filtration ability of shellfish? Yes. Do microplastics affect denitrification? Yes. We see some data from our marshes when we've actually seen microplastics accumulate there, and we don't get that same denitrification rates. So yes, these are sad times.
So I get a question for these shellfish mounds and areas. I know like denitrification, like it requires like a few different things to kind of occur. There needs to be carbon, there needs to be nitrogen, a form of nitrogen, and anaerobic conditions. So what is the big limitation a lot of times?
So you're right. Like, so for denitrification to happen, you have to have low oxygen, supply of carbon, and supply of nitrate. So it depends on the system, but we often see that nitrate is actually limiting denitrification. So especially at the point where we're really far out, like on our oyster reefs or like like they've been able to process a lot of it. And so when you actually give them more nitrate, they go to town. And what I think is happening is that they're actually supplying a ton of carbon through their biodeposits. So they're kind of shifting that balance, and they're actually there's some priming for denitrification to happen when that nitrate's available.
Interesting. Are they able to process like the other forms of nitrogen that are further along, like in the reduction process, or?
So, like, what are you
Well,
thinking
like
about here?
I mean, I guess like eventually like nitrate, it goes through a series of transformations before it becomes like atmospheric nitrogen. Like,
Yeah.
is it, I guess like, are they able to, I mean, in these, I guess the areas that you've been looking at a lot of times where the nitrate is somewhat limited,
Yeah.
are those other transformations able to occur there pretty easily, or is that like?
Yeah. So I didn't give my full nitrogen cycling and oyster reefs figure, but the idea is that you have the phytoplankton, the nitrogen comes into the system, it feeds the algae grow, the oysters graze on that and then repackage it. And so that nitrogen that's now is organic or particulate nitrogen is now being transferred to the sediments. And then it's actually the whole series of reactions that is happening. So then you have ammonification, nitrification, and then denitrification is typically what we see in these systems.
Cool. Okay. Okay, there's a question here. And I'm also just real quick, in the interest of time and everything, I'm gonna go ahead and put the post quiz up while this question is being answered. So that just be wary. Another pop-up is gonna occur here. But the question is, and this is from Megan Blanchard. So I understand Florida Sea Grant folks are starting to look at the potential for seaweed aquaculture economy in Florida, especially because of the excess nutrients in nearshore environments. I wonder what you think about multi-species ocean farming for seaweed and bivalves, and if you could produce more favorable denitrification rates.
Megan, so I am actually the lead PI on that seaweed project and work with Florida Sea Grant on it, which I'm super excited about because the idea is that our shellfish farmer, so shellfish are filtering the water, they're cleaning the water, they are creating conditions for the for more light to get there. So then these macroalgae grow. And the part of the story I didn't talk about was that the shellfish are also recycling a lot of nutrients. I just kind of got at John's question right there. So denitrification isn't 100% efficient. So there is still some nutrient recycling that's happening. So all this macroalgae accumulates on these shellfish, on the shellfish gear. And that's a ton of nitrogen. Like macroalgae are so good at sucking up that nitrogen. But right now the farmers just kind of slough that off and like let it go out into the waterways. And so, yeah, we are exploring to see if harvesting that can be a new net nitrogen removal, and then turn that into some product like fertilizer or packaging. We're actually working with a company that wants to turn seaweed into packaging material. So I think that's awesome. The second part of your question is about the multi-species and whether this sort of shellfish bivalves and seaweed interactions. I do think that they will promote denitrification, but I also, yeah, I think that they will promote denitrification collectively and we'll have the higher rates with them together than we would alone. But my students working on that to really figure out if seaweed is those seaweed bivalve interactions. We have another project that we're looking at clam and seagrass interactions. And so do I think that adding clams into seagrass restorations will increase denitrification? I'm not sure. I actually think that they might be functionally redundant in their ability to provide this service when they're together. So I think they will both enhance denitrification relative to background, but together I don't think we're going to see an additive effect. But stay tuned. There's more to come on both of those topics.
Cool. Oh, here's another one popping up here. So is there any effort to extract nitrogen from eutrophic waters and use that in other ways, like another byproduct?
Yeah, so like the best way to extract it is to have the biomass there. So whether that is mechanical harvesting of in-water vegetation, that's been something that's been suggested as a BMP to like remove nitrogen that's in that the plant biomass. That's one. And then like our shellfish are one for our waterways that we're thinking about too, along with the macroalgae. So there are other more technical and approaches that people are looking at to extract nitrogen, but I think the most efficient is through biomass assimilation and removal.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here and share the results. And then Dr. Smyth, if you could be so kind as to lead us through like the questions and answers here.
Sure. You guys have really great questions. I love this. This is fun. So eutrophication only occurs in freshwater lakes. The answer is false. We have eutrophication in our freshwater and our coastal zones, but the type of nutrient really does matter. So nitrogen is usually the limiting nutrient for marine and coastal ecosystems. So the second answer is true. And again, that's because there is more nitrogen fixation typically in freshwater systems, and the fact that it's all about the changing ratios. So phosphorus is more likely to be the limiting nutrient in freshwater systems because the phosphorus is bound to the sediments and soils. And so that means there's plenty of nitrogen available, but phytoplankton can't meet their phosphorus demands. So when they get that phosphorus, they're like, let's go, let's go, let's go. But then in our coastal systems and marine systems, that salt water actually releases all of that bound phosphorus, and now there's tons of phosphorus, and now there's no nitrogen. So that's why nitrogen is the limiting nutrient there. And so by limiting nutrient, what we're meaning is like the nutrient that you add that turns on the phytoplankton to bloom. What is denitrification? It is the removal of nitrogen gas to the atmosphere by microbes. I talked about oysters enhancing it. Oysters don't actually do denitrification. It is the microbes that perform it. And I did have the trick question in there about what is nitrogen, that conversion of N2 gas to ammonium, and that is actually nitrogen fixation. So the other side of that arrow. And that's that process, the Haber-Bosch process has created our own human's way to do that, to convert N2 gas to ammonium for fertilizer. Yeah, sound is not a type of pollution that's considered under the Clean Water Act. However, we do have sound pollution, or sound is an issue in coastal areas, especially for like marine mammals. So it's something to be thinking about. And then what can be done to reduce our nitrogen loads? All of the above. We can restore oysters, we can build stormwater ponds, we can upgrade wastewater treatment plants. These are all little pieces of the puzzle and tools that we can use in our toolbox for managing nitrogen before it enters coastal waters.
All right. Well, thank you again, Dr. Smyth. Like I said, I mean, there's the way the we're used to thinking about this is like through the green industry best management practices, limited urban fertilizer, but like sometimes, I mean, kind of the stuff that you covered, we don't go in as much detail or explain it as well. I feel like a lot of the time, and like it was really good to get these perspectives and like really particularly like about nitrogen and like, look, really this is the thing that's causing all these problems here. Like, and don't get me wrong, we emphasize the other stuff too, but I do feel like that's the big one we talk about, like like algae kills and fish kills because of algae, etc. So it was really good getting like that big picture and then like what's going on in the state to address it here. So
great. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, I think there's more of a connection between what's happening on land than in the ocean than we think about, and it's really important to have these discussions and dialogues between those people who are really salty and those people who are really fresh.
Yeah. Oh, well, cool deal. Thank you again. And yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll be able to do something in person, or like have some kind of collaboration here between like Sea Grant folks and like the green industry people. So, but yeah, with that, if you guys got questions, and we're kind of running out of time here, feel free to like email me, and like I can try and pass them along. I'll follow up here and email everybody the recording of this so that you've got that as well. And then like when you can potentially like email me back at that point, because I see some stuff popping up here. But in the interest of time, we got to head out.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Dr. Smyth.
Thank you all. Just real quick, John, if you do have interest in saltwater intrusion work, let me know and I can connect you with some great speakers for you all. So
sweet.
okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Take care.
you.
I'll reach out. Thanks, Ashley.
Thanks.